one of the foundations of the work that we're doing is the understanding from the ancient wisdom that this creation is sung into being, that somehow this creation is song, that what we would ordinarily call energy or vibration, we can really call song. And profoundly, that our voice is a microcosm of the very, very essence of creation, that we personify the process of creation, and that our own voice somehow embodies the dynamics of the holy word and how consciousness takes form to express its creative potential through the holy word. As I often say, there is no musical instrument as profound as your voice, because your voice is an interdimensional portal. Your throat is the nucleus of your etheric body. It mediates between the subtle universal elements and the material elements of your form. And somehow your voice has ability to marshal the forces of nature, to manifest your will both internally and externally. So it's a worthy of, so our voice and the powers of the voice, which are deified as Vakdevi, one of the expressions of Brahma, the breath of life, our voice and the powers of the voice, the dynamics of the voice, the question of how this voice works, is very, very much worthy of contemplation. Because again, the key to the mystery is right here in you and your own experience of your own life, that the key to the mystery is not to be found in any book, but is to be found in your own lived experience when you turn to the encyclopedia of your own life and your own experience, and you contemplate your own experience. So we appreciate that this life is a great mystery, and we join in those who for millennia have tried to understand this incredible gift of life, and who've personified the forces that articulate the dynamics of creation, who personify these dynamics of creation in these gods and goddesses as we contemplate this mystery. So the Sanskrit term Sarasvati means essence of self, that this goddess somehow, that her iconography contains fingers that are pointing to the moon of the essence of ourself. And as we've said before, her vehicle is the swan or the goose, the Hansa, which represents the supreme principle of this breath of life, that everything that we have to say here, everything we point to, everything we articulate keeps coming back to the mystery of the breath of life. And each of these things I'm talking about is so deep that we can only describe it as a mystery. To talk about consciousness is only a contemplating consciousness. To talk about the breath is only to contemplate this incredible mystery of the breath. So we're saying that this mystery of the breath of life is the vehicle of this creative intelligence who we call essence of self. There's nothing more primary to life than this breath, and nothing more primary than the powers that inhere in this breath. So we begin our contemplation with an invocation of the goddess. And here we call upon these powers by chanting the bija mantras, the seeds that manifest these powers, the formula for attuning us to these dimensions of this great mystery of creative intelligence and this great mystery of life herself. So let's join the sage Karuna Ma, who's leading us as we invoke essence of self, this goddess, this power.
देव्यै नमः। ॐ ऐं श्रीं ह्रीं सरस्वती 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 देव्यै नमः।
In 1973, I was first introduced to the work of Dr. Randolph Stone, and I can remember gazing at those charts in the first few pages of wireless anatomy, and just really being fascinated by them and called to understand them. And for many years, I was a desperate student of esoteric philosophy, trying to really understand this mystery, just passionately, hoping that this intellect, that understanding could somehow save me from the pain, that would somehow find some balm that would save me from the bomb that I was in. And I couldn't really find what I was looking for in books. And somehow I vowed that if I started teaching this, that through teaching this, I would pull from the ether somehow. I would manifest the knowledge that I was seeking, that what I was, and finally I ended up like reading books just to see to make sure it wasn't there. And, but my intention was through teaching and through the passion of wanting to understand this and wanting to explain this to my students, that I would somehow find what I was seeking, find what I was so desperately seeking. You've chosen to study with Bruce Berger, and one of the things that I feel is my unique contribution, and that I wanted to make sure that you get from studying with me. I'd like to repeat it again and focus on it. And that is, the world is music. The world is sound. And that the elements are truly the elemental keynotes. That your body, this is the essence, your body is a musical instrument that is played by nature. Your body is a musical instrument that is played by the breath of life. Let's begin by looking at this screenshot.
The Latin word for breath is spiritus. It comes from the same roots as our word spiral. It is spiritus that plays the instrument of nature. All of nature is alive. All of nature is breathing. As we breathe, the tissue of our bodies is stretched by the act of breathing in a cycle of attunement to nature and the cosmos. On cellular and molecular levels, the tissues stretches to modulate its musical pitch. As we breathe in, there is a lengthening of the tissue to the keynote of resonance that cross-culturally and transhistorically the ancients called the air element. Thus, through attunement to the keynote air, life force stepped down from the subtle universal elements into embodiment. Then in quantum fashion, the inhalation ballooned the tissue into the radiant keynote of the creative potency of the solar fire element. Next in the cycle of breath is a still point where inner and outer forces come into balance as the earth element. Then, as the diaphragm descends, the tissue contracts into resonance with the lunar keynote of the water element. Nature is a fabric of ultrasonic resonance, attuned to the keynotes of earth, solidity, water, the fluid medium for life force, fire, the functioning of creative intelligence, air, the feedback process, which is the essence of intelligence, and ether, which modulates sacred space between the subtle, universal elements of the cosmos and the material elements of nature. All of nature is vibrating in a life-giving state of praise, attuned to the voice of the goddess Sarasvati, singing the holy word, singing the music of creation. This understanding of the relationship between the breath and attunement to the elemental keynotes of resonance is the key to understanding energy in the healing arts.
Throughout the polarity community, there's many people who talk about the elements, but I think this is what I just articulated here is the key to understanding the reality of the elements, that your body is a musical instrument that is played by the breath. And the fundamental keynotes on a molecular element are these elemental keynotes that life force energy steps down in quantum fashion through these 5 steps of ether, air, fire, water, earth. The ether is the universal medium of energy, and the quality of ether is this profound harmony of freedom, of unobstructed motion. And that through that medium, somehow intention draws from that medium into manifestation to air. The root of air is desire and aversion. The quality of air is movement. And on the subtle level, the subtlest level of air, the essence of air are the desires and aversions that move us. So for instance, in the body, when we talk about the air field, the heart is the nucleus of air. The lungs are the positive expression, and the colon is the negative expression. So our heart's desire and our heart's aversions are fundamental to our movement in life. So the air element is about movement. The lungs, positive, basic rhythm of life. And then, of course, the colon, the negative field of the air element. Then energy, as we breathe in every cycle, we expand into the fire, into an attunement with the solar force. Again, we've emphasized that every cycle of breath is from a neutral source into radiance, inspiration, where every molecule spirals into entrainment with the solar force that we call the fire element. So that this breathing modulates the pitch of the tissue on an atomic and molecular level to align us, to entrain us through sympathetic vibration with the solar force and that inspiration of spiritus. Then As the diaphragm descends, the tissue moves into a still point, which is a balance of the sattva, which is moving from within to without, from above to below, the involutionary force, and tamas, which is moving from without to within, below to above, the evolutionary force. There's a still point, which we call earth, the balance of the forces above and below, within and without. And then as the tissue descends, we move into a lunar attunement, which we call the evolutionary force, or tamas guna, of earth and water. So every cycle of the breath is an attunement to the reality of the elements. And as these winds, these vayus, these fields flowing through the body on a molecular level that sustain a life. So I hope that, that I feel like this is my most profound and unique contribution, is the understanding of the reality of the elements, and that I'm sharing with you, and that you're harvesting that from your time with me. Let's go on to our affirmation to live in reality. One of the foundations of the ancient wisdom is contained in an affirmation, an aphorism that says, what is here is everywhere, and what is not here is nowhere. What is here is everywhere, and what is not here is nowhere. And what it is that is here, that is everywhere, is the present. And what is not in the present doesn't really exist. Where it's in our mind. It's merely a thought. And yet the present is a reality of a higher order, filled with infinite creative potential. And this is very similar to the model that you get in contemporary physics, in quantum physics, where they tell us that our intention chooses from infinite possibility to manifest a wave or a form, or waving, or are waving through this creation. So let us go to our affirmation to live in reality, to lead us from the unreal to the real, from the shadows of our mind into the Jyotir, the self-effulgence of the light of consciousness right here in this moment, from the terror of death and oblivion into the nectar of immortality, the consciousness that we're experiencing right now. Your very presence is the nectar of immortality, Amritam Gamaya.
Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. Asatoma Sat Gamaya, tamasoma trotir gamaya Rityoma amritam gamaya Om asatoma satgamaya Tamasoma trotir gamaya Rityoma amritam gamaya Om asatoma satgamaya Tamasoma trotir gamaya Rityoma amritam gamaya Om asatoma satgamaya Tamasoma trotir gamaya Rityoma amritam gamaya.
And our invocation of the universal life. Again, one of our root premises is that creation is a living, breathing, conscious being. That everything that moves is the life breath of a living universe. That we are somehow atoms, perhaps cells in the body of this creation. So join with me in our invocation of the universal life. I am that without boundaries, limitation, or separation. I am a universal life of indescribable energy and unlimited consciousness. The stars and the planets are the cells of my body. I'm filled with indescribable energy and unlimited consciousness. I'm willing energy from that I am. Mahavishnu, the great spirit. Narayana, the soul of the universe. Mahasaraswati, goddess of wisdom, to manifest radiant health, perfect health, divine health, to manifest deep inner peace, equanimity, serenity, to manifest self-realization, illumination, liberation. May peace and justice prevail on earth. Any questions about anything I've been raving about this morning or about your own practice?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Thanks. I remember you were saying that air is the daughter of ether and ether is the mother of air. Is that true for all the
Yes.
elements? Like air is the mother of
Yes.
fire? All the way
Yes.
down.
Yes, one of the ways of understanding the elements comes from traditional Chinese medicine. And ether is considered very subtle. So you deal with it through the next step in the step down. So you deal with ether through its daughter air. And air is, again, the mother of fire. Think about the way air stimulates fire, the way speech stimulates action. And then fire is the mother of water. And then earth is very dense. So you deal with earth by working with its mother, water. Okay? And then beyond that, fire and water are very powerful, and air is merely the relationship between fire and water. Okay? That air is a servant of fire and water, that air is always seeking a balance between yang and yin. Okay. So when we're talking about yang and yin, we're talking about the breath of life. Yang, the expansive breath, and yin, the contracting breath, the solar and the lunar, the fire, the involutionary, and water, that all we're ever talking about in the elements is the primacy of the breath of life. That energy is always moving from within to without and then returning back within. And so Dr. Stone says that at the square of its distance from the source, it steps down, becomes more dense, more material, from ether, unobstructed motion, filling all space, to air, to fire, to water, to earth. Earth is the boundary. Water is a profoundly pure medium for life. Fire is the working, the transformational energy. Air is the feedback mechanism, the nervous system. And ether is the overall space, mediating between the space without and the space within. So and cross-culturally and transhistorically, the science of the ancients was based on working with these 5 elemental keynotes which vibrated through everything and defined everything. So in some systems, you work with 5 elements. And for instance, in the Sanatana Dharma, we talk about ether. In Chinese medicine, they talk about tree, that the rings of a tree radiating out from the center embody the primary quality of ether, that it's this solar force that radiates out from the center of everything. Okay? So when we talk about tree, that's the old Chinese way of talking about ether, which is this field that radiates from the center of everything, defining the space and holding the largest space through which the other dynamics happen. Isn't that, do you hear that? But because ether is very subtle and earth is very dense and air will always maintain the balance between the two, we only really need to talk about yin and yang and manipulate yin and yang. So in traditional Chinese medicine, your focus is on manipulating yin or yang, but not necessarily the Tao, which is beyond our ability to manipulate it. So whether we're talking about 5 elements or tridosha or triguna or yin and yang, we're talking about the same dynamic, which is the root of the science of the ancients. And it's very mysterious until you understand that all we're talking about is the breath of life. Everything comes back to the primacy of the breath of life. Breath is life force energy. And all of the mystery that we're seeking are contained in studying the breath and the dynamics of the breath and what's going on to that breath. How does that breath resonate down to every atom of the body? That's what I want to talk about today.
So when the screen came on and it was the animation of ether, air, fire, and then the still point came, and then water, earth came in first. You were talking about earth, and then you went to water. So I'm just thinking about a little bit about the oval fields, and is that why the succession of the step down did that, or do you, I know that earth and, water shift as far as the oval fields go. So I didn't know why you had talked in that succession. And yeah, so if you could, I just heard you say that, and because earth is so dense that you tend to want to deal with earth through water. So I don't know if that's right or.
Yeah, no, I haven't quite figured this one out yet. Okay. Certainly we can simplify by looking at the reality of the gunas. Okay. So if we talk about sattva, there the fields turned inward and receiving the step down from the source. And then as we breathe, we obviously make a humongous difference. As we breathe in, Then on a molecular level, the whole tissue barrels out into what we call rajas, an entrainment with the solar force. And then as we breathe out, the diaphragm shifts and it collapses into this lunar attunement. Okay, can everyone hear the reality of the triguna and the cosmic attunement? Again, we're arguing that guna comes from a Sanskrit root giri, which means vortex or field. So we're talking about this shift in the field of neutral, positive, and negative, and that each breath is defined by this neutral, positive, and negative movement. Now, as we contemplate, what's happening on a molecular level, one of the key things that we note in the macrocosm is what's happening in the diaphragm, and how in a quantum fashion, the diaphragm shifts from solar to lunar attunement. So that's what I'm trying to embody in that still point. Like the glyph for Earth is a square, and the square symbolizes the forces above and below, and without and within. So that's what you're seeing there, is that still point because part of the way breath works is we're dealing with ultrasound, and we're dealing with cycles of ultrasound. And at every point that rajas and tamas, the two ultrasonic forces, solar and lunar force, touch, they counter each other and create a sattvic still point. So there has to be that still point as the breath moves from expansion, it self-corrects neutral and dances into negative. So something like that. I hope my thinking is less fuzzy than my images, and that helps. But I kind of, each way of seeing is a way of not seeing. One way of looking at it emphasizes certain dynamics, and other ways emphasize other dynamics. So very good question, Mary. And I hope that helps to clarify things.
Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.